the big changes that happened really recently was the news about Paris, right? Paris picked up 9k, and then 9k brought in Rush, Levi, Sparkle, and Hanbin. That is nuts. But the order in which they actually released the announcements was super weird, and I think it kind of baited a bunch of people into thinking that things were kind of a little bit differently made. Oh, and Z as well, yeah. How do you pronounce that guy's name? Is it Exy? Exy? Z? Something like that? There's a bunch of really interesting stuff about this Paris move. Clearly, Paris Eternal had a talk with 9k and were convinced by his vision. 9k, as the first coach to be signed, should also tell you something. Like, yeah, Rush was the head coach that was signed, but there's no way that Rush was head coach and brought 9k on. Like, 9k is the brains behind this operation. So the fact that 9k is willing to take assistant coach again behind Rush, what does that mean? Probably that Rush and Sparkle had an agreement to come into the Overwatch League, where they would come into the Overwatch League together. And Rush had offers last year that I know of that he declined because he wanted to come up at the same time as Sparkle, because he, believes in the guy and thinks that he knows him and knows how talented he's going to be and knows that he can get the best out of him. So, Rush probably wanted a place where he had creative control over the roster and the vision of what they were attempting to achieve. A good place for Sparkle to settle down as well. And 9k offered him that opportunity. And then approached Paris and sold them on this kind of opportunity. Yeah. So, yeah, Mto, in some sense, I really do think that 9k is the power behind the throne. Now, in the terms of how the coaching staff is probably going to work here, I think it's probably going to work in the exact same way as Krusty's system in the San Francisco Shock, which is that even though Krusty was the head coach, Krusty, Junkbuck, and 9k were all on an even hierarchy. It wasn't like Krusty's word was law and he was handing out tasks for Junkbuck and 9k to do. All three of the coaches worked, in some sense, democratically to come up with what the vision should be and what the strategies were and this kind of stuff. They had different roles on the team and different strengths, but there isn't so much a big boss and other people doing like little bits and bobs. Why do people talk about Krusty so much more, even you? Because Krusty was the person that started it. Krusty also had a lot of success on Boston Uprising doing a similar role. And what was the other thing? Oh, and just because Krusty is the head coach. Because it's Krusty's system, but he trusts the other coaches that he's with and elevated them up to his position so that he works in that trio. But it's Krusty's vision. It's Krusty's idea of how to run a team environment, Now, as for how it'll apply to the Paris Eternal, I think that you'll see Rush, 9k, and you'll see Levi all have a lot of power and say within this team. And I think that the three of them together might be the strongest coaching staff that you have in the whole league at the moment. And we don't know all of the other coaches that have been announced yet. And also you have to think about, well, there is still Krusty and Junkbuck, which is unbelievably good. But this is now like absolute elite of the elite level coaches. Levi was a fantastic coach when he was with Element Mystic back when. And then going into the Shanghai Dragons, I think he did a very good job at being able to tease out a style that worked incredibly well for that team. And I think that 9k is fantastic too. Now, let's talk about whether the coaches are actually going to be able to do anything with this roster, though. Because I know there's been a lot of uproar online about... Honestly, it's really weird. It's this classic thing that always happens online where it's like, a few people are being racist, being like, I don't want Koreans in my French team, that kind of shit. Even though it's just a patently ridiculous position to hold. And they wouldn't say the same about other European or Western or whatever. Anyway, a few people have been like that on Twitter, and everybody else has come out, as they should, to say that is disgusting behavior, etc., etc. But I think it's made it's turned the conversation very much towards that and away from some actual genuine critiques of Paris Eternal's well, just their strategy overall. Because the Paris Eternal came in, and let's kind of refresh our memories and go back to 2019. The Paris Eternal come in, and they've got a full European team. They say multiple times that they are not excluding anybody. Like, if you're a great Korean player, you could play for the Paris Eternal. But it was clear that their vision was as a European team. They wanted to represent Europe. They wanted to get a fan base in that way, that kind of thing. But they never built a European super team. It wasn't even possible to build a European super team without paying big money to poach talent from other teams, or buy talent from other teams. They never did that, and instead they had the most consistently mediocre performances of any team in the league. And I'm not saying that as hyperbole. They really did, just consistently didn't make any kind of progress. I think they were the only team at the end of the season to not make stage playoffs even once. They went 3-4 every stage, right? So yeah, it was a very, very consistently poor, or at least mediocre, season for the Paris Eternal, with no real big spurts of potential at any point. So from that point, you've got a couple of directions. You could try and really build a European super team, which would fit your philosophy of what you built your fan base on in the first place. And I don't blame fans that are like, we thought we were being a fan of like a European super team. There's obviously some level of like patriotism or national pride or something like that goes into all sorts of different sports. I mean, that's why geolocation works so well. Is because if you're from Chicago, you're more likely to cheer for the Chicago team. The World Cup, it's why the World Cup is so good. It's because people cheer for different nationalities and attach themselves to them way more easily than they do to just a random group of people or some random brand or team name. So I think Paris Eternal branding themselves as a full EU team and like the hope of Europe and all of that kind of stuff. People enjoy seeing like these plucky Europeans that, generally speaking, Europe doesn't actually have that much budget or infrastructure, talent development, that kind of stuff. So I can definitely see why Paris were able to get a lot of fans by going in that direction, and maybe piss off a bunch of fans by doing a total 180 on that in the next season. But this is the vision that the Paris Eternal have gone with, which is split basically between French and Korean. We've seen French and Korean work well in the past before. The old Immortals team, the LA Valiant kind of teams, had... who did they even have on that roster? I think they had Unko, Soon... no. Did they have Unko? Was it Unko, Soon, Kariv... Fate. I actually can't remember. I can't even remember that far back. Yeah. They had two French and 3 Korean, and then Space or something. I can't even remember. No, they didn't have Space at that point, did they? They had Envy. Oh, it was Agilities. Agilities was the final player. Yep. Yeah, you remember, chat. Yeah, so we've seen French and Korean play together in the past before. It's a large culture gap, I think, and also... generally speaking, if we're talking like very large generalities, French teams tend to stick together and French groups of players tend to stick together quite a lot. They seem to have like an identity with each other, that they enjoy hanging out with each other and this kind of stuff. And in previous esports and previously in Overwatch, that can lead to cliques developing in both Korean and French teams. So I think blending this team together will actually be quite a bit of a challenge on a like a friendship, camaraderie, teamwork kind of level for the Paris Eternal. I think these 3 coaches will have their work cut out for them, especially when you consider that as good as Rush is, I don't think he speaks English like very well at all. I might be totally wrong with that, but I think head coach Rush doesn't speak English particularly well. Now, of course, there's enormous caveats to a lot of these things as well. Like, a bunch of the Korean players get on insanely well with the people from Europe. Actually, like, Heap in particular just seems like a super chill, laid-back kind of guy. As does Ben Best, honestly. So, a couple of the stereotypical issues that Paris Eternal, you might think that Paris Eternal would run into, may not, just by virtue of the players that they actually have on board and, their specific personalities. I think Cruz is also a very good player for being able to tie the French and the Korean parts of the team together, because in my experience in Overwatch, when you see Korean players join majority English speaking teams, what gets them most comfortable is if the English speaking players just act like morons and not pretend to, but like try and speak really terrible Korean, and they're like willing to make a fool of themselves to the Koreans so that the Korean players don't feel like they're fools for trying to speak English, you know? Like, it's really difficult to go into a totally different country and speak a different language that you're not comfortable with. You feel like you're fucking it up. But if there's a very light-hearted atmosphere around the team, which somebody like Cruz can try and inject, then I think it becomes much easier for you to mesh as friends. And I think this team will genuinely have to like be fairly close friends, especially with the geolocation and so much travel involved next year. It's an ambitious project to try and mesh Korean players that have never played on mixed roster teams together with French players that a lot of them haven't played on rosters with Korean players before. So, okay. That's a challenge for them. Now let's look just at the base setup of this team, because when you actually look at the players that they've signed, here's where I think there are more potential criticisms of Paris, because if you assume that Paris doesn't have anything else, any other moves that are going on for them right now, here's what they've been doing at the moment, you know. This is here we are, October the 18th. So 9K's announced as assistant coach. They announced the departure of Danye, Shadowburn, Finzi, and LH Cloudy. This says to me that even though Ben Best is staying on the team, he's going to be riding the bench the majority of the time, because in my opinion, Cloudy was the better of the two of them. But I think Ben Best is getting by just not 100% on the virtue that he's French, but obviously the Paris Eternal is still trying to keep a lot of that European, a lot of that native French crowd. They'll need to do a lot of activations in Paris as well, and they want to keep the identity of their team, so they're going to keep all four of the French players. They could have potentially got rid of them. Just because they were under contract doesn't mean they couldn't have dropped them and, you know, bought them out of their contracts, but these are players that, as a backup, I think Ben Best and Nico would be perfectly fine. I think Soon has a spot on a roster like this for sure. He's also played with Korean players before and knows how to work. He's also a very chill guy, if not the most outgoing and sociable and friendly, but he'll mesh perfectly fine, I think. And I've seen a lot of people on Reddit say that why the fuck did they get rid of Danye and Shadowburn and keep Nico? I think that people don't have any respect for Nico by the sounds of it, because yeah, Shadowburn's a bigger name, but Shadowburn has not really done anything this season noteworthy. His Pharah was still very good this season, but on most other heroes, I wouldn't be putting Shadowburn in there. Nico actually this season, and over the course of his entire, say like the last 3 years, has been a very important player for a lot of teams that he's played on. He's been able to fill in gaps and be super flexible, swapping between hit scan and flex DPS kind of roles. And he played the Brigitte to a pretty damn decent degree for the Paris Eternal, and also played Diva for them in the past when they were playing on Goats Comp as well. This is a very skilled and flexible backup player that, if I'm the Paris Eternal, and even if I'm not a French team, I'm still taking Nico as my all-round backup over Danye or Shadowburn. Like, sorry to break it to you guys, but I was not particularly impressed with either of these players this season. And even though they could have a bit of potential, you're damn right I'm going for Nico every day of the week as an all-round backup player that is filling in for some kind of star players, or maybe filling gaps within the roster. As for Finzi, clearly they wanted to bring on Hanbin, right? Who's going to be this off-tank player. Hanbin seems like he's pretty capable. I don't know whether he's immediately... I don't think it's going to be like Choyobin coming into the league or something where he takes the league by storm and he's, you know, the top 3 off-tank on every single role. But I think Hanbin's pretty capable. I think this is a very solid pickup. I would expect them to still pick up another main tank. I think that this team is still lacking another Korean main tank. If you have Hanbin in there with Sparkle and maybe with Z as well, I think you probably are looking to add another Korean main tank in. and Z trades time with Soon. Obviously, you need to field people like Soon and Nico until Sparkle and Z even become of age anyway. And although the backline of Cruz and Heap does seem weak on paper, I wouldn't really anticipate them upgrading it too much, because otherwise you've just essentially got like a full Korean team but with one outside player. I don't really think that they'll do that. I don't think Finzi had a particularly great year this year. Paris in general, I think, was struggling for a bit of an identity. I think my criticism of them when they first came into the league, though, honestly, was that they didn't really have the on-paper ability to be able to stand up to a lot of other OWL teams. And that also applies to Finzi. I don't think that he was the best off-tank when he got signed to the Paris Eternal. And I think he could have done with a little longer in contenders, or to be on the bench underneath somebody with a bit more experience on an OWL team before he came in. It's also possible that they would have been better in a different meta, but I don't know. I like Finzi, but I don't think that he's tearing anyone's world apart at the moment. And Cloudy, I think, just didn't get an opportunity to really show. I think it was really strange that the Paris were subbing in and out Ben Best once a stage. It seemed like they had difficulty finding what the point of their team was. But now they have a very strong identity. And the identity is, we are a team that is going to put solid players like Soon and Nico, who are going to give you respectable performances almost every time you put them in. And we are going to allow them to play around people like Sparkle and Z, who are fucking bananas. Like insanely good players. And then to add a bit more stability to the team overall, we're going to add Hanbin and maybe, like I said, another main tank. I like this direction from Paris Eternal. I think that they have a lot of challenges to overcome. This team needs to mesh. This team needs to work on their ability to empower Sparkle and Z. This team needs to think about their backline of Cruz and Hip and make sure that that is actually not just getting rolled over by other OWL teams, because that seems like a big weakness on paper to me. And also, they need to find a way to get wins before Sparkle turns 18. Because from February to May, end of May, literally the last day of May. So, whole of February, whole of March, whole of April, whole of May. That's 4 months without Sparkle, where you are playing without kind of your franchise player. That's a fuck ton of time to try and find wins in the first half of the season. Hanbin turns 18 fairly early on in the season, so they don't really have to worry about that. And Z is going to already be 18 by the time he gets into the league. I didn't even realize that, actually. I thought Z would also turn 18 sometime during the season. But it would be awesome if they were able to find a way of fielding both Z and Soon, depending on what the meta is. You know, if there is some kind of double hit scan or, you know, that kind of meta, I think that both of those players are pretty damn good. Z in particular is very explosive. Soon is very reliable. So I think any meta where you need double hit scan, this is going to be a really powerful DPS duo. But wouldn't Grey start over Heap? Maybe. I don't really know, because both of them have been starting over each other kind of backwards and forwards halfway through this season. And I don't know. Especially if Sparkle and Z are actually fielded, I cynically feel like if Ben Best is on the bench for a Korean main tank and Nico and Soon are on the bench for Korean DPS players, I think that they would run Heap just to put a French face out there for the crowd. Because in my opinion, the difference between Heap and Grey is not that much. I think overall, they had one of the weaker backlines in the Overwatch League. Isn't Aid signed to them as well? Yeah, Aid is signed as a coach, right? I don't really know about this. Like, it's impossible to tell. Like, how am I supposed to know how good Aid would be as a coach when his performance on Toronto was just meh? But that was as a player. I've not heard anything about Aid. I haven't heard that he's really intelligent. I haven't heard that he's really stupid. I haven't heard any of that shit. So, who knows? I think, though, really, the big three for this team are 9K, Rush, and Levi. I have a feeling that this is... I personally do think that this could be the best coaching roster in Overwatch League next year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best team, because they've got a lot of things to do with this roster to mesh it together. These guys have never played on mixed rosters before. Who knows what their level of English is like. Rush doesn't even speak English that well, as far as I know. Like, the player personnel that they actually have is, like, pretty weak backline. I think they need a new main tank as well. Nico is going to be having to fill in a lot for Sparkle, so we'll see how they manage with that. There's a lot of challenges here. I get the feeling that 9K may have bitten off more than he can chew. But I hope not. I hope that Paris fans can get to see an incredible team here coming together under fantastic coaching. I get the feeling that he's bitten off more than he can chew.